Sinai is a harsh desert of precipitous granite mountains and narrow rock-strewn valleys. In the scriptures, it is called the waste, howling wilderness. Water is scarce, and few plants manage to survive. In this severe and barren land, it becomes difficult to sustain life. And yet, it was here that hermits and anchorites came in the latter 3rd and early 4th centuries, searching for places of solitude where they might pass their lives in prayer and fasting. But Sinai is more than a harsh desert, for it was here that God revealed himself in a special way to the prophet Moses, first at the bush that burned with fire without being consumed, and then at the peak of Sinai, where he received the tablets of the law. Here he beheld the tabernacle in divine vision, and was commanded to create its counterpart on earth, that the worship offered here below should be unto the example and shadow of heavenly things. Here also God revealed himself to the prophet Elias, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a still small voice, or as it says in the Greek of the Septuagint, phoni avras leptis, the voice of a gentle breeze. One of the oldest surviving Christian pilgrim accounts is that of Egeria, who visited Jerusalem in the year 383. From there, she continued on to Sinai, a distance of 22 staging posts. She climbed to the peak of Sinai, where a venerable Hieromonk celebrated the liturgy for the assembled monks and pilgrims. She writes, "A hale old man, a monk from early life, an ascetis, as they say here." After the liturgy, the monks brought fruits from their gardens for the benefit of the pilgrims, and she writes, "The priests of that place gave us evlogias, that is, of fruits which grow on the mountain." She then venerated the cave of the prophet Elias, a short distance below the summit, and was diligent to read the appropriate scriptures from the books of the kings. Only then did she descend to the opposite valley, and she writes, "There are a great number of monastic cells of holy men there, and a church in the place where the bush stands. The bush is alive to this day and sends out green shoots." In the latter 4th century, she witnessed what was already a flourishing monastic presence, and was herself even then following an established pilgrim route. Incorporating Greek words into her account, ascetis, evlogias, she shows what we should have known even without such quotations. From the 4th century, Sinai was an extension of the Holy Land, the far reaches of the Holy Land. As such, it was also a part of the Greek-speaking world. And yet, if Greek was the language of the Sinai monks at that time, it was not exclusively so, for Sinai was the destination of monks and pilgrims from the whole of Christendom. An anonymous pilgrim from Piacenza, Italy, visited Sinai in the middle of the 6th century, when the fortress walls of the monastery would only recently have been completed. He writes, "They led us into the valley between Horeb and Sinai. At the foot of the mountain is that spring where Moses saw the sign of the burning bush, and at which he gave water to his sheep. The spring is enclosed within a monastery, and the monastery is surrounded by fortified walls. In it are 3 elders who are learned in several languages, I mean Latin and Greek, Syriac, Egyptian, and Besson, as well as many translators of individual languages." The climate at Sinai is very dry and stable. The monastery has never been destroyed and never abandoned in all its history. Over the centuries, a remarkable library was formed. The wide range of text in many different languages are a testament to the long and complex history of the monastery. The greatest number are in Greek. They consist of manuscripts of the scriptures, the services, writings of the church fathers, and books of spiritual wisdom to guide and sustain the monks in their dedication. But the volumes also include texts in classical Greek, which remains the pinnacle of the Greek language. They also contain medical texts, historical accounts, and travel accounts. Here are a few examples. Greek 2 is a 10th century copy of Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. The text of the scriptures is written in large characters, leaving generous margins. These are filled with commentary drawn from 24 different authors, beginning with Josephus and Philo. The marginal notes are invaluable for the insights they provide into the meaning of the scriptures. They show the typology, the correlation that exists between Old Testament and New. This is the key to understanding the imagery of many Orthodox hymns and icons. Greek 418 is an illuminated manuscript of the Ladder of Divine Ascent, dating from the 12th century. St. John compares the spiritual life to the ladder that Jacob saw extending from earth to heaven. As we make our ascent, sorrow gives birth to joy, and fear is replaced by love. St. John writes, "There is actually no limit to love. We shall never cease to advance in it, either in the present or in the future life, continually adding light to light." This manuscript has 43 miniatures. The color is subtle, and the use of gold abundant. The faces are expressive and individualized. Their modeling indicates an artist trained in or familiar with Constantinopolitan workshops, though we cannot rule out Sinai as the place of production. Greek 3 is a manuscript of the Book of Job with scholia and protheoria by Olympiodorus. It dates from the 11th century and is thought to have been produced in the studious Monastery of Constantinople. It has 27 miniatures. In all, the figures are elegant and slender, with widespread use of gold hatching. Folio 7 recto has an illumination depicting Job and his wife. They are seated on backless thrones, their feet resting on jeweled and pearl footstools, and they converse with each other. Cosmas Indicopleustes was a Greek merchant in the 6th century who made several trips to India and Ceylon. He later became a monk in East Syria. He wrote his book on topography between 547 and 549 to give details about the countries he had visited and to explain the history and operation of the cosmos. He mentions the Christians of India who live in the area where pepper grows. The Sinai manuscript dates from the early 11th century. Folio 202 verso shows a man harvesting peppers, an important export from India even in the 6th century. To the right, we see a seal, a dolphin, and a turtle. Greek 339 is a manuscript of the homilies of St. Gregory the Theologian, 4th century bishop of Constantinople. It was written between 1136 and 1155. Folio 91 recto has a headpiece portraying the Nativity of Christ. The headpiece is very striking, with its rich and infinitely varied ornament. Greek 165 is a small manuscript of the four Gospels written on parchment in the 15th century. The scribe was Ioannis Rossos, a native of Crete, who created this manuscript for the Sinai dependency on Crete. Folio 20 verso has an illumination of the evangelist Matthew. He sharpens his quill with a penknife, the ink pot open before him, ready to begin writing his gospel. In the middle of the 15th century, Ioannis Rossos immigrated to Italy, where he worked in Venice, Florence, Rome, and other cities, copying and translating works of Greek classical literature. He is considered to be one of the most important Greek copyists of the Renaissance. A manuscript of the Iliad was written by the same scribe and completed on the 16th of May, 1466. In September 1722, it was acquired for the Harleian Library. The manuscript is now kept in the British Library, where it is known as the Florentine Homer, Harley Manuscript 5600. Sinai has a number of manuscripts written in Christian Palestinian Aramaic. This is a type of Western Aramaic and thus is close to the dialect that would have been spoken by Jesus and his disciples and the first Aramaic-speaking Christians. a Sinai manuscript written in Christian Palestinian Aramaic that dates from the 7th or 8th century, contains the sayings of the Desert Fathers, number 59 in the collection. Classical Syriac was a language spoken in Upper Mesopotamia. In the late antique world, Syriac-speaking villages stretched from the Mediterranean to the foothills of the Zagros and from Antioch to Ctesiphon, the Persian capital. Many important works of Greek philosophy, literature, and medicine were translated into Syriac. In addition, many works of Christian poetry and exegesis were composed in Syriac. The oldest surviving manuscript of the works of Dionysius the Areopagite is Sinai Syriac 52, a manuscript of the 6th century, the very century in which these works were first translated from Greek into Syriac. Syria, Palestine, and Egypt came under Arab rule in the early 7th century. By the 8th century, Christians were expressing themselves in Arabic and finding their place in Arabic culture. It was then that many works were translated from Syriac into Arabic, or more rarely, directly from the Greek. In this way, the torch of learning was passed from the world of classical antiquity to the emerging Arabic-speaking world. Greek 36 is a bilingual psalter written in majuscule Greek and Kufic Arabic, the earliest Arabic script. It dates from the 8th or 9th century. This is an early example of the translation of the scriptures into Arabic. Arabic 151 is a manuscript of the Epistles of St. Paul and the Acts of the Apostles. It has the following colophon at the end of the epistles. The weakling, the poor sinner, Bishr ibn Asiri, translated these 14 epistles from Syriac into Arabic, and as best he could, set forth their interpretation for his spiritual brother Suleiman. He finished the work in the month of Ramadan in the year Hijra 253 in the city of Damascus. The year 253 in the Muslim calendar corresponds to the year AD 867. There is evidence for Georgian monks of Sinai as early as the 6th century, but this reached a zenith in the 9th and 10th centuries. Georgian scribes copied out manuscripts of the scriptures, lectionaries, and other liturgical books, as well as lives of the saints, homilies, and ascetical writings. Some of these were important translations made at Sinai. Georgian 97 contains selections from the work of Saint Ephrem. Monks from Georgia made the translation, copied out the text on parchment, and bound the manuscript. The Glagolitic script was devised by Saints Cyril and Methodius, brothers from Thessalonica, who were sent by the Byzantine Emperor Michael III in 863 to Great Moravia to bring Christianity to the Western Slavs of the area. Sinai Slavonic 37, known as the Ephrologium Sinaiticum, is a collection of diverse prayers and dates from the 11th century. The Glagolitic manuscripts of Sinai represent a good half of all the material that has survived from the period before the 13th century. The monastery has manuscripts that are great works of art. Greek 204 is a lectionary containing the gospel readings for 71 feast days. It dates from the 10th century and was created in the Imperial Scriptoria of Constantinople. There are 7 illuminations at the beginning of the manuscript. Following the illuminations, every letter on every page is executed in gold leaf. The letters flash and gleam as the pages are turned. But the library also contains many humble manuscripts that were used daily in the services and in private prayers. These are worn, and some of them have been repaired with whatever materials were at hand. Sinai Greek 898 is an Orologion written in the year 1335. From the prayers of the 6th hour, we read, "Let thy tender mercies, O Lord, speedily go before us, for we are become exceeding poor. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of thy name." These manuscripts seem no less important witnesses to the devotion of the monks and to the isolation and austerity of the monastery centuries ago. While the Sinai manuscripts are the most famous, the printed books are also of great importance. These also are in many different languages, but by far the greatest number are in Greek, some 8,000 volumes in all. These range in subjects from the writings of the fathers, books of inherited spiritual wisdom, histories, a large section of classical Greek texts, decisions of the church councils, copies of the scriptures, and service books. We take it for granted that any important library will contain thousands of volumes. It is sobering to remember that before the earlier 20th century, the only way to bring these books to Sinai was by camels and caravans. We appreciate even more the diligence of the monks to acquire books for the library on their travels, or to bring collections that were presented to the monastery by generous donors over the course of many years. 4 important volumes are on display in the monastery Skavophylakion, the museum space adjacent to the church that was opened in 2002. These are the first edition of Homer, printed in Florence in 1488. Someone has added by hand the commentary by Eustathius, Archbishop of Thessalonica, who lived in the 12th century. We also have a copy of the Etymologicum Magnum, printed in Venice in 1499 by Nicolaus Vlastos and Zacharias Kaliargis. It is one of the most beautiful specimens of early Greek printing, with extensive use of opening initials and decorative woodcuts printed in red. Next is the first edition of the works of Plato, printed by Aldus Manutius in Venice in 1513. This edition was printed with the support of Lorenzo de' Medici and his son, Pope Leo I, an admirer of Greek literature. We also have 1 volume of the Eton Chrysostom on display. These were printed in 8 volumes between 1610 and 1613, edited by Henry Saville, Provost of Eton. Before the renovation of the Sinai Library, Professor Nicholas Pickwood was able to make a number of important observations. The library contains 5 editions of the works of St. Basil the Great, printed by Froben in Basel between 1532 and 1552, and no less than 19 copies of the 1535 edition printed by Stefano da Sabio in Venice. All but 2 of these are in Greek-style bindings, the majority of which come from the same Venetian bookbinder's workshop. The same binder was responsible for a small Aldine edition of the theological orations of Gregory Nazianzus, also known as Gregory the Theologian. The volume was originally owned by the Domus of St. Nicholas of Tolentino in Venice. A 1550 edition of Aristotle, printed in Basel, was bound for Jacopo Zabarella, professor of Aristotelian philosophy at the University of Padua, bearing his coat of arms on the front cover. Zabarella died in 1589. The volume was subsequently acquired by the monk Gregory from Crete in the Sinai dependency in Messina, Sicily, who wrote a note in both Greek and Latin on the title page. Books such as these are not only important in their own right, they also show lines of communication. A book printed in Basel was bound in Padua. It traveled to the Sinai dependency in Messina, Sicily, and eventually made its way to the Sinai Monastery. 5 volumes of the Aldine Galen were bound in black goatskin with an empty cartouche for a coat of arms on each side of each volume. The 5 volumes of the Aldine Galen were all printed in the year 1525. It is not unexpected to find in the Sinai Library a copy of De Officiis by George Codinus, a book that explores the court and higher ecclesiastical dignities and ceremonies up to the Middle Paleologan period. It was printed in Paris in 1626 by Sebastian Cramoisi, Royal Greek printer, but it is in a contemporary English binding. An inscription on the inside front cover records that it was presented to Archbishop Arsenius of Thebes in 1716 when he was visiting England by Richard Boyle, 3rd Earl of Burlington, after whom Burlington House, now the home of the Royal Academy in London, is named. Here are two further examples. Nicodemus Metaxas was born on Cephalonia in 1585. He traveled to London around 1622, where his brother traded currants from Cephalonia. While he was there, he mastered the art of printing, subsequently publishing various titles bound in 3 volumes, produced in 2 different printing houses. Having acquired the necessary knowledge, training, and skills in the trade, he purchased a printing press at his own expense. In 1625, he printed a small booklet, Βιβλίον του ορθού λόγου βεβαίωσης καλούμενον, set with Grand John's great primer Greek that he had purchased from the Puritan printer William Jones. The book features the royal garter on the title page, with a note that it was printed in London at the house of John Haviland and at the expense of Jeremias, the Bishop of Magny. The island of Cephalonia was under Venetian rule at that time. From a document recently discovered in the Venetian archives reporting unauthorized printing activity, together with a copy of this booklet, we now know that it was, in fact, printed by Nicodemus Metaxas upon his return to Cephalonia. It was secretly printed at the Monastery of New Jerusalem in Omala, the Monastery of St. Gerasimus, where his sister, Mother Agatha, had been a nun for 20 years. It was made to appear that it had been printed in London because he did not have the permission of the Venetian authorities. This small booklet, printed in 1625, is the first book printed on Greek soil. In July 1627, Metaxas arrived in Constantinople in response to Patriarch Cyril Lucadi's wish to establish a publishing house there under the auspices of the Patriarchate. The first book was printed in November, but in the midst of printing a second book in January 1628, the press was shut down and confiscated by Janissaries. Through the mediation of Sir Thomas Roe, English ambassador to the Sublime Porte, it was restored to its owner. But in June, Metaxas was consecrated Bishop of Cephalonia and departed from Constantinople, taking his press with him. There it continued in operation. He died in 1646. The ascetical homilies of St. Isaac the Syrian, 7th century Bishop of Nineveh, are sublime spiritual reflections. They remain the paramount guide for those living the solitary life. They were translated from Syriac into Greek at the monastery of Marsava, outside Jerusalem, by the monks Patricius and Avramius at the end of the 8th or beginning of the 9th century. In the 18th century, Patriarch Ephraim of Jerusalem read a manuscript of the ascetical homilies at the monastery of Marsava. He found another at the monastery of St. Catherine on Corfu. From his enthusiasm for the homilies, he commissioned the learned priest-monk Nikiforos Theotokis to prepare a text for publication. Theotokis was living in Constantinople at the time and used 2 manuscripts available to him. The book was printed in Leipzig in 1770 at the expense of Patriarch Ephraim, who distributed the copies to Greek Orthodox churches and monasteries in the East, sending as well 1 copy to Paisi Velichkovsky in Moldavia and a few to Russia. It soon became extremely rare. We have been told that none of the great libraries of Europe has a copy. This makes it all the more remarkable that the Sinai Library has 11 copies of this edition. The present library building dates from 1951. It was a great improvement over the numerous small rooms in the oldest part of the monastery that had been used up to that time for the storage of the manuscripts. but it was constructed where there was no electricity at the monastery, when building materials could only be brought through the desert with great difficulty. We have known for some time that today we can do better. The St. Catherine Foundation is a registered charity established in the United Kingdom in 1996. The foundation and its affiliated foundations in New York and Geneva support conservation work at St. Catherine's Monastery, and the monastery's library is the present focus of conservation activities. In March of 1998, Nicholas Pickwood was asked by the St. Catherine Foundation to direct these conservation activities. He felt that the first task should be the assessment of the entire manuscript collection, which would record the present state of each manuscript. This information could then be used to plan and coordinate further programs. Teams of 6 or 8 conservators spent 4-week sessions at the monastery, filling out complex forms, recording the state of each manuscript. They also made drawings and took photographs of each binding. In all, 35 conservators from 9 different countries came to Sinai in the course of 15 sessions, beginning in November 2001 and completing their work in February 2006. This information proved to be essential in planning the new library. In 2005, Dimitri Porphyrios, principal of Porphyrios Associates, London, was commissioned to draw up a concept design for the renovation of the Sinai Library. Ambitious conceptual designs were received for the renovation of the library itself and for the construction of conservation workshops and rooms for the digital photography of manuscripts on the west wing of the building opposite the library. Members of the community and local workers carried out all the basic tasks, removing plaster from walls and repointing the stones. The building was stripped back to its concrete core and then reinforced. We found that the 1951 concrete roof slab needed to be bolted together in places with steel plates. By contrast, the 6th century fortress wall, with its ashlars of hewn granite, is still in an excellent state of preservation. Today, a balcony with columns and arches leads to the entrance, where high-security steel doors are surmounted by a mosaic with the logo of the monastery set into a limestone frame. Passing through the narthex, we come to the reading room for visiting scholars. A corner of the room preserves the site of an ancient chapel, its apse built into the wall when it was constructed in the 6th century. The tables and chairs have been carved with the same logo of the monastery. Bookshelves hold reference books with the most recent editions of patristic texts. All of the furniture was custom made and imported from Greece. The room can be air-conditioned in the summer, and there is underfloor heating for the winter. The entire room creates an inviting space for the study of the Sinai manuscripts. A passageway lined with further bookshelves leads to the large hall that serves as the principal storeroom for the manuscripts and early printed books. Video cameras have been installed throughout the renovated library. Fire alarms have been put in place. If a fire is detected, the doors of the storeroom automatically close. An illuminated sign warns anyone present not to enter. Pipes placed strategically throughout the room are connected to 120 canisters of inert gas. These would be discharged, filling the room and lowering the oxygen level, and in this way extinguishing the fire. The room is beautiful, but more importantly, the volumes are now in a more stable environment to ensure their long-term preservation. We are grateful to the St. Catherine Foundation, which provided the funding for this renovation. We are grateful to all who provided their expertise and help to make this renovation possible. In making plans for the renovation of the library, 2 decisions were made that had far-reaching effects. The old library had the manuscripts at balcony level with a collection of early printed books below, but most scholars visit Sinai to study the manuscripts. It was decided to reverse this arrangement to make the manuscripts more accessible to the librarian. Today, the shelves at balcony level hold the collection of early Greek printed books. The manuscripts are now at the lower level. Many of the Sinai manuscripts are very fragile. Sinai Greek 210 is a lectionary containing the text of the Gospels divided up for reading in the services. It is a large and imposing volume written in magical Greek on parchment. It dates from the 8th century. Should such manuscripts be rebound? That is always a difficult question. In the past, especially in European libraries, it was customary to rebind such manuscripts. This rarely happened at Sinai. As a result, the Sinai Library is one of the most important in the world for intact early bindings. Today, conservators feel that if a manuscript is stable, preserving its historical integrity should be paramount. When a manuscript is rebound, a part of its history is lost, but such volumes do need protection. It is customary for manuscript libraries to have the more important volumes in protective boxes, and a decision was made to do the same at Sinai. Categories were created for those manuscripts that deserve to be enclosed in protective boxes: manuscripts with illuminations, manuscripts above a certain age, manuscripts in Byzantine-style bindings. By the time all these categories were applied, it became evident that some 2,000 manuscripts and 200 early and important printed books deserve protection in archival cases. The entire lower area of this room was given over for the storage of these volumes. Thanasis Velios, a computer programmer working for the St. Catherine Foundation in the UK, wrote a program that would take the dimensions of the manuscripts from the manuscript survey and create a layout to make the most efficient use of the available space. This was used to create a design for the racks that hold the individual shelves. Each manuscript has now been put in place in its designated shelf. It was a relief when I placed the last manuscript in place and checked again to verify that all were accounted for and each in its proper place. Manuscripts that are more recent, that do not need protective cases, some 1,300 in number, have been stored on rolling stacks in the archive, which is an adjoining room at balcony level. Sample boxes were made of archival board covered with library cloth, but in the dry air of Sinai, they distorted and did not hold up. The same happened with sample boxes made of wood. It was decided to make the boxes of stainless steel. Though the cost would be high, these are certainly long-term solutions. Each box is custom-made to fit a unique manuscript. The stainless steel has been smoothed on all edges and polished to a mirror finish. A plate on the front of brushed stainless steel has laser-cut letters giving the language and number of the manuscript with the logo of the monastery below. The box opens flat. It is lined with plastizote, an inert foam material widely used by conservators in the UK. Silicon gaskets slow changes in temperature and humidity, but allow the contents to adjust to ambient conditions. The manuscript itself is in a fold-up box made of archival board called a wrapper. This opens to reveal the manuscript within. It is an easy process to retrieve a manuscript for a scholar and return it to its place. Sinai Greek 901 is an orologion written in the 16th century. It is in a Byzantine-style binding. In time, as funds allow, all of the manuscripts in this room will be enclosed in archival cases. These will give the manuscripts the protection they need. There are plans to create a conservation workshop at the west end of the same building. Then, trusted conservators with years of experience in such matters can turn their attention to those volumes that do need intervention to ensure their long-term preservation. The Sinai Library continues to be of the greatest importance for the study of the Scriptures, the The writings of the Church Fathers, the services, and the spiritual heritage of Sinai. In some ways, it is the collective memory of the monastery, a witness to its long and multifaceted history, and to the devotion of the monks who have lived here for so many centuries. We are grateful to all who have contributed towards the conservation of the Sinai Library. It is a great treasure, a treasure that we hold and trust for the whole world.